The sun hadn't yet broken the thick ceiling of fog that hovered above Napa Valley. It was the kind of silence that clung to your skin heavy, like breath held too long. Leah Mercer zipped up her lightweight windbreaker, stretched her calves. On the front step of the Airbnb and tapped her smartwatch, 6:11 a.m. The roads were still sleeping. The vineyards rolled endlessly, fenced with fog and morning dew, their long, crooked vines clinging to trellises like secrets whispered in a dream. She set off at a steady pace, earbuds in, ponytail bouncing behind her. It was supposed to be her reset, a quiet escape before the wedding chaos began. Just a weekend away, she'd said. Just the two of us. But Brad had canceled last minute, citing an emergency client meeting in San Francisco. Leah had smiled when he told her, but her eyes had fallen to the floor. It wasn't the first time. Her route wound past the old stone church, then dipped into a narrow trail weaving through private vineyards. She had run it the morning before and loved the solitude. No traffic, no watchers. No one at all. 20 minutes in, her smartwatch vibrated. She stopped, wiped her forehead, and checked her pulse. 118 BPM. A cool breeze lifted her hair as she turned to the right path, a detour she hadn't taken yesterday. It cut closer to the vineyard's interior, past weathered signs that read private property, guests must stay on trail. Leah hesitated only a moment before jogging forward. The air smelled of grapes, soil, and something deeper, wet wood or rusted iron, a few rows down. A scarecrow stood between vines, arms outstretched, wearing a torn flannel shirt. Leah paused. Something about it looked off. She shook the thought away. She needed this. A break from texts, pressure, the ever-growing cold distance with Brad. She pulled out her phone. No service, her breathing steadied. She jogged deeper. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Leah Mercer. It wasn't until 10:38 p.m. that Brad finally called 911. She went for a run this morning and never came back. The dispatcher asked the usual questions. What was she wearing? Did she take her phone? Was there a fight? No, she was fine. Just quiet last night. The Napa County deputies arrived at the Airbnb just after midnight. The porch light was on. Leah's purse sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. Her phone was plugged in, still charging. Her car keys and wallet were in their usual place. Her bed was made. She hadn't returned at all. Detective Mariella Crane was called in early the next morning. She didn't like working tourists' missing cases. They usually turned up drunk, embarrassed, and apologetic. But something about this one felt different. She's a fitness coach, Brad told her, pacing the small living room. She runs 5 miles every day. She said this trip was for clearing her head. Was she upset? Mariella asked. Brad hesitated. She's been tired, wedding stuff. Life stuff, we've been off lately. Off how? She thought I was distracted. I guess I've been working more. I didn't think she'd just disappear. The search started that morning. Dogs were brought in. Drones scanned the hillside. Volunteers swept the trails and nearby ravines. But there was nothing, no torn clothing, no dropped phone, not even a footprint on the soft earth. It was like she'd vanished mid-stride. The Airbnb host, an elderly widow named Mrs. Kessler, told deputies she'd seen Leah leave early that morning from her kitchen window. She waved, she said, wringing her hands. She smiled at me. Poor thing looked tired, but she smiled. No security cameras caught her on the road. No neighbors reported seeing her past 6:30 a.m. later that afternoon. Mariella reviewed the footage from Leah's phone. A short clip recorded the morning before she vanished showed Leah standing at the edge of the vineyard, filming a sunrise. If I disappear, she says jokingly, look under the vines. She laughs, but the laugh is strained. Her eyes dart toward the trail behind her, just for a second. As darkness fell over the Napa Valley again, the headlines began to spread. Fitness coach missing on Vineyard Trail, no trace of woman lost in Napa. She wasn't herself. Fiancés AYS, the locals whispered in wine bars and grocery store lines. She probably ran off. People snapped before weddings. Napa safe it had to be someone she knew. But the trail ended where the fog lifted. And beneath the soil. The vines kept growing. The sun rose over Napa like it always did, warm, golden, indifferent. By the second day, search teams had combed nearly 6 square miles of terrain. Trails, ravines, fence lines, nothing, not a scrap of clothing, not a single footprint. The fog that had blanketed the area on the morning Leah disappeared now became the perfect alibi for erasing evidence. Detective Mariella Crane stood outside the Airbnb, her boots caked with dust, flipping through her notes. The facts didn't add up. Leah Mercer had walked out the front door for a morning jog and had seemingly evaporated. The interior of the Airbnb was still untouched. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no fingerprints that shouldn't have been there. But one detail stood out. Leah's phone was still plugged into the wall right by the nightstand. Who goes jogging without their phone? Mariella muttered to herself. Brad sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, head in hands. He hadn't slept, not much anyway. His shirt was wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse. She left early. I didn't even hear her get up. What time did you wake up? Mariella asked. Around 8:30. She wasn't back. I figured she took a long run, maybe stopped for coffee. She does that sometimes. And you waited until after 10 p.m. to report her missing. Brad flinched. I thought she'd come back. I kept checking the road. I didn't know what else to do. Mariella didn't respond right away. Instead, she scribbled a note. Too calm or too coached? They brought in cadaver dogs, drones, infrared, still nothing. A footprint in soft dirt. Near the north end of the Vineyard had excited one deputy, but it turned out to be from a wine tour guide the day before. No torn clothing, no dropped items. Not even tire marks near the narrow detour Leah had taken. Her sneakers, a pair of neon orange Asics, were never recovered. Back inside, Mariella opened Leah's suitcase. Neatly folded clothes. 2 pairs of heels. Makeup, a small jewelry pouch. She had packed like she expected to stay the weekend, not disappear into the earth. Then behind the suitcase, a smaller canvas gym bag. Inside, a single thing, an engagement ring in a zippered pocket. It didn't make sense. Leah had been engaged to Brad for over a year. Why wasn't she wearing the ring? Mariella returned to the living room. Brad stared blankly ahead. Why wasn't Leah wearing this? She asked, holding up the ring. Brad took a second too long to answer. We argued. She took it off. What was the fight about? His jaw tensed. It was stupid, about the wedding. She said we were rushing it, said maybe we should postpone. Mariella sat down across from him. Did she want to postpone or cancel? Brad's voice lowered. I don't know. She was emotional. She gets that way sometimes. Overthinks everything. She overthought everything, or you made her feel like she was. That struck a nerve. Brad looked up, eyes narrowed. I'm not the villain here. I didn't say you were. There was a pause. Did you love her? Mariella asked softly. Brad's eyes welled. Of course I did. Back at the sheriff's office, Mariella pulled up Leah's background. Born in Oregon. Father passed when she was young. No siblings. Graduated top of her kinesiology program. Opened a fitness studio in Berkeley. Had one prior restraining order not against her, but filed by her 5 years earlier, against a former boyfriend. Mariella dug deeper. She found the man's name. Damian Wells. Last known address, Sacramento. It meant nothing yet, but it was a thread. Deputy knocked on her doorframe later that afternoon. We finished going through the car. Mariella looked up. And? Nothing. Car's clean. No GPS entries except the winery she visited Friday. Trunk spotless. And the shoes? Not in the car. Not in the house either, Mariella frowned. So where the hell are they? That night she returned alone to the vineyard edge where Leah's trail supposedly ended. The sun was dipping behind the hills, casting the fields in gold and blood red. She stood silently. The vines were still. Somewhere out there, something had happened. Not just a lost jogger or a runaway bride. A choice had been made. Someone had followed her, or waited for her, or convinced her to step off the trail and never come back. The wind pushed through the leaves like a whisper. Something wasn't right. Something was buried. It was late. September again. The morning air was cool and still, and the grapevines stood shoulder to shoulder under the fading fog. 4 years had passed since Leah Mercer vanished. The world had moved on, mostly. Tourists returned. Bottles were uncorked. The vines bore fruit, and the mystery of the missing jogger in Napa faded into whispers and wine-stained stories. But beneath the roots, she had not moved. Pablo Gutierrez grunted as he twisted his spade into the hardened soil. He was replanting a dead section of vine just off the main trail near the southern edge of the Weston Estate Vineyard, an area mostly left alone because the grapes there had stopped growing 2 seasons ago. Locals blamed poor drainage. Pablo didn't care. He dug where they told him to dig. He was 37, soft-spoken, and preferred plants to people. His hands were thick, nails permanently caked with dirt. He'd worked vineyards from Paso Robles to Healdsburg. Never asked questions. Never expected answers, but that morning, something caught. His spade struck something soft and then hard, not rock, not pipe. He dropped to one knee and brushed away the soil. His glove hit fabric. Bright orange, faded and muddy. Shoelaces, sneaker. At first, he thought it was trash. Then he noticed the way the roots had wrapped around it, like the earth had tried to claim it. His fingers trembled. He dug gently, pulling free more material. Then something pale, curved, a piece of bone. He froze. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes. The vineyard's southern edge was cordoned off. Crime scene tape fluttered between 2 rows of dormant vines. Detective Mariella Crane stood staring at the partially exposed grave, heart pounding, fingers clenched. She hadn't worn this badge in nearly a year. She'd transferred out of missing persons, out of Napa altogether. But the call had come in with one name attached. Possible remains of Leah Mercer. And everything came rushing back. Where exactly? Did you find it? She asked. Pablo pointed to the shallow hole. His voice was steady, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Right there. I was digging the roots. It was in the dirt. The shoe first. Then the other stuff. What made you call? It in? He shrugged. Didn't feel right. The bones. Too small to be an animal. Have you worked this section before? He hesitated, then nodded. Last season. We don't come down here much. Roots don't grow good here. Why not? Another shrug. Dead spot. Mariella squinted toward the vine rows. Why was this patch barren? Had something poisoned the soil? Or had it simply been a grave all along? The forensic team worked quickly, carefully. Bit by bit, the soil was cleared. Beneath the shoe were more bones, femur, rib, fragments of a skull. Tangled in the remains was a rusted chain, and at the end of it a small heart-shaped locket. Sealed shut with grime, Mariella opened it with a gloved hand. Inside, blurred by rust and time, was a tiny photo of a young boy in a red hoodie smiling wide. She recognized the image from Leah's file, her little brother, Tyler. Leah had worn this necklace in every social media post, every fitness interview, every family photo until the day she vanished. Mariella whispered, "It's her." Back at the station, the discovery shook the department. 4 years of silence had finally cracked open. Deputy Ramos found himself staring at the evidence table, whispering, "She was there the whole time?" Mariella nodded. Someone buried her under a dead vine. Nature did the rest. They couldn't identify the full skeleton on scene, but the shoe, the locket, and a partial dental match confirmed what her gut had known the moment she got the call. The girl from 4 Septembers ago, the jogger with a haunted laugh, Leah Mercer, had been found. That night, Mariella couldn't sleep. She went back through the old case file, timelines, witnesses, photos, Brad's statements, Monica's worries. That eerie video Leah had taken the morning before. If I disappear, look under the vines. Had she known? Or had it been a joke that turned out to be prophecy? The one piece of evidence that now screamed louder than the rest was the phone she'd left behind. Why would Leah, a fitness coach and digital junkie, leave her phone charging on the morning she disappeared? Unless someone had told her not to bring it, unless someone had planned that morning. Mariella met Pablo again the next morning. He was leaning on a shovel, staring at the excavation site, now cordoned off with plastic tarps and bright flags. "You worked here 4 years ago, too?" She asked. "See," he said, "every season. This spot never planted well. The vines died 2 years ago. Did you see anyone?" Unusual back then, around this area? He thought for a long moment. Then, maybe. Mariella raised an eyebrow. Maybe? A man came, not one of us. Maybe the Vineyard boss's friend or investor? When? He looked up at the sky. Late, maybe 3 days after the girl went missing. You remember his face? He hesitated. Glasses. Dark shirt, fancy watch. Not like us. Mariella's blood turned cold. Brad wore glasses. Leah Mercer's skeleton was barely complete, but her bones still told a story. At the county coroner's office, beneath sterile lights and cold metal trays, the remains began to give up their secrets. The femur showed signs of trauma. A shallow fracture across the rib cage suggested blunt force. Hidden bruise that had healed just enough before death to nearly go unnoticed. But what confirmed the worst was the back of her skull, a web of fine hairline fractures, with traces of dried blood trapped in a strand of matted hair. Preserved in the soil. It was no accident. Someone had hit her hard. Detective Mariella Crane leaned over the autopsy photos, jaw tight, mind racing. Not a fall, the coroner confirmed. Someone struck her from behind, possibly with a rounded object, a rock or wine bottle maybe. Based on the angle, it was deliberate and close. Mariella said nothing for a long moment. Then she exhaled slowly. She fought. Back at the precinct, a reopened evidence file sat open on her desk. Years of dust were wiped away, and under them, memories returned. Leah's nervous smile on video. Brad's too practiced grief, the unanswered questions that haunted the case. A new forensic scan of Leah's smartwatch data, finally decrypted by newer tech, revealed a sudden heart rate spike at 6:28 a.m., followed by a total flatline 2 minutes later. It wasn't a natural jog. It was a chase. Mariella contacted the forensic tech assigned to comb through Leah's recovered cloud files. Among the recovered deleted documents was a drafted email, unsent, subject, "If something happens to me," written 4 days before Leah disappeared. The body read like a whispered scream. "I'm tired of pretending I'm not scared. He says he loves me but watches everything I do. I thought it was stress, but he's not the same. He's controlling, cold. He yells when I challenge him. I don't even know what triggers it anymore. I'm afraid if I end it, he'll ruin me. Or worse. If something happens to me, please don't assume it was an accident." Oh, Mariella sat back in her chair, heart heavy. The words weren't explosive, but they were terrified, honest, unmistakable. Why hadn't Leah sent it? She dug deeper. She revisited the texts Leah had exchanged with her best friend Monica a few days before she vanished. Most were innocent, but one stood out. "Can I tell you something and you promise not to say anything to Brad?" The reply came an hour later. "Of course, what's going on?" There was no follow-up. No reply from Leah. Mariella called Monica in. For questioning, they met in the quiet corner of a coffee shop. Low light, low voices. Monica hadn't aged much, but the weight behind her eyes had. "I thought she ran away," Monica whispered. "I wanted to believe she was okay." "You two talked that week," Mariella said. "What didn't you tell me in 2019? Monica looked down at her coffee cup, then back up. "She told me she was going to leave him. Said she had a new job. Offer in Oregon. She was scared to tell Brad." "Did she say why?" "She said he'd never let her go clean. That he'd find a way to make her regret it." Mariella leaned forward. "Did he ever hurt her?" "She never said that directly. But she had bruises sometimes. And once, when we were wine tasting up here, she locked herself in the bathroom after a phone call with him. She wouldn't say why." The fog of the past was thinning. Leah had been trying to leave. The ring in the suitcase. The unsent email. The emotional tension. She hadn't gone out that morning to jog. She went to confront him. Mariella pulled Brad's original interview tape from the archives and rewatched it. One line chilled her. She gets emotional sometimes. Overthinks everything. A subtle shift in blame. A seed of instability. An easy story to sell when someone disappears, but Brad had slipped once. 4 years ago, he told officers Leah left for a jog at 6:15, but her smartwatch data showed she had not started running until 6:22, who told him she left at 6:15. A deputy entered Mariella's office. "We finally got a match on the dirt from the shoes." She perked up. "And?" "Same mineral composition as soil samples from the Weston Vineyard." Mariella's blood ran cold. Brad had told police he never stepped foot on the vineyard after dropping Leah off that weekend, but Pablo had seen a man who matched Brad's description 3 days after the disappearance, standing exactly where Leah's body was found. Mariella stood by the window that night, watching the sun vanish over the hills. Leah once ran across. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a runaway. Leah Mercer had been afraid, trying to escape a man she thought loved her. And in the end, he buried her where no one was supposed to look. Except the vines remembered, and so did she. The cafe was quiet except for the clink of ceramic cups and the low hum of jazz spilling from dusty speakers in the corner. Monica Bishop stirred her coffee for the third time without drinking it. She hadn't spoken to a detective in 4 years. But now, with Leah's bones unearthed and her locket placed into evidence, Monica could no longer carry the silence. "I didn't think I'd ever see her again," she said softly, voice tight with guilt. Detective Mariella Crane sat across from her, notebook closed. This wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation long overdue. "You said Leah was planning to leave Brad," Mariella said. "That she was scared." Monica nodded. "Scared is putting it lightly." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. "I kept this. I don't know why." She stopped on a screenshot, a message from Leah dated 5 days before she vanished. "Promise me you won't tell anyone." "But he grabbed my wrist today. We were arguing about the wedding. He squeezed so hard I had to pull away. He told me to shut up." Said he didn't have time for another outburst. Monica handed the phone over. She said it like it wasn't a big deal. Like it was her fault. But it wasn't. She was trying to justify him. Mariella scrolled down. Leah had added, "He's not who he was in New York. I don't even know who I'm marrying." They had met in Manhattan. Leah was running boot camps in Central Park. Brad was working for a boutique investment firm. He was clean-cut, well-spoken, and every bit the charming fiancé as when he moved with her to Berkeley, but something shifted. "She told me once that he'd get quiet in ways that scared her more than yelling ever could," Monica said. She'd talk and get no response. Then he'd explode over something tiny. "Did you ever witness it firsthand?" Monica hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There was this wine tasting trip," she said. "We drove up to Napa, just us girls, Leah, me, and 2 others. A bachelorette preview weekend. She seemed fine at first. Laughing, tasting everything, making dumb toasts." She paused, but then Brad called. She walked away to take it. 15 minutes later, she came back pale. Wouldn't tell us what he said. She just whispered to me, "Don't tell him I was drinking." Then she went into the bathroom and cried for 20 minutes. Mariella took it in silently. She always made excuses for him, Monica continued. Said he was under pressure, that she was being too emotional, that it was just wedding stress. "Did he ever isolate her from you?" Mariella asked. Monica gave a bitter smile. "She started canceling plans. Stopped returning my calls, only texted when he was out. If I asked to come over, she'd say the house was a mess or that Brad needed the car, always something." "Classic control," Mariella murmured. Monica looked up, her voice suddenly sharp. "You think he killed her, don't you?" Mariella paused. "I think Leah was afraid, and I think she didn't vanish into thin air." Later that afternoon, Mariella returned to her office, her desk covered in scattered timelines and maps. She drew a line from Leah's final smartwatch ping to the coordinates where her body was found. The route was barely a half-mile, not far at all. Too close for coincidence. Brad's original statement claimed he was asleep until 8:30 a.m. that morning. But Mariella knew now he had lied. Pablo had seen him on the vineyard days later, checking irrigation near the same rows where the soil turned infertile. And now they had motive, abuse, fear, control, isolation. Still, what they needed was behavioral escalation. Mariella called a contact at Berkeley PD and requested any past incident reports involving Brad or Leah, noise complaints or neighbor Concerns. What came back was a single overlooked record, March 14th, 2019. Officer dispatched to apartment complex, female heard crying. Caller anonymous? No charges filed. The responding officer had noted a woman with puffy eyes answering the door, insisting nothing was wrong. Male partner in background, calm, arms folded. No signs of physical violence observed. The woman's name, Leah Mercer. That night, Mariella replayed the screenshot Monica had shown her. The line wouldn't leave her mind. He told me to shut up. Not scream. Told a calculated dominance. The silence after that command must have been deafening. A psychological chokehold. And Leah, strong on the outside, shrinking on the inside. She wasn't just scared of Brad. She had been conditioned by him. At sunrise, Mariella visited the site again. The vines rustled softly in the breeze, the sun casting long, golden shadows. The earth had given Leah back. And now it was time for her voice to return too. She reached for her phone. Get me a subpoena for Brad Haywood's travel records. I want to know every movement he made between September 13th and 20th, 2019. Flights, tolls, gas stations, everything. She hung up and looked at the silent rows of vines. There was more buried here, and the roots were starting to lift. It was a Tuesday morning when Detective Renner sat down at his desk with a fresh cup of black coffee and a legal pad, already covered in notes. Leah's file was now thick witness statements, forensic reports, and the haunting scan of the unsent email. But one thing nagged at him. Brad's silence. Brad Mercer, the grieving fiancé, had played the part of a confused, devastated man. Too devastated, maybe. His refusal to elaborate on what upset Leah the night before her disappearance had already raised suspicions. Now, Renner was determined to dig deeper. He began with something small: traffic citations, employment history, and property records. Everything looked clean. Too clean. Then a curious note in a background request from Oregon caught his eye. Record sealed, expungement requested 2017. It took a subpoena and some pressure. But by Friday afternoon, Renner was staring at a file stamped confidential. Inside, an arrest report from 2014. Portland PD. Brad had been picked up for assault after a neighbor called in a domestic disturbance. The victim, Melissa Carter, a woman he'd lived with briefly after college. The report was chilling. Melissa had bruises on her neck, a cracked lip, and swollen eyes. She never testified. The case was dropped after she refused to cooperate, and Brad took a plea deal for disorderly conduct. The judge agreed to seal it in exchange for community service and therapy. Renner leaned back in his chair. He's done this before, he muttered, but it wasn't enough to make an arrest. Not yet. They needed something that tied Brad directly to Leah's final hours. Something that bridged the bruises on her ribs with the lies he now stood behind. That's when Anna came into the picture. Her name had first appeared in Monica's interview, almost as a footnote. She'd said Leah wasn't just suspicious of Brad. She thought he was seeing someone in Napa, a woman at a winery. French accent. She had a name, but I forget it. Something like Anne? Renner sent an officer to follow up. Anne Lavier, age 33, head sommelier at Belhaven Vineyards, was known for her quiet charm and encyclopedic wine knowledge. She'd worked at Belhaven since 2017. When asked if she knew Brad Mercer, her demeanor changed. I haven't heard that name in years, she said. The interview lasted 2 hours. At first hesitant, Anne finally opened up. Yes, she had met Brad in 2019. Yes, they'd had a brief romantic involvement, but it ended abruptly after just 3 weeks. He had claimed to be in transition from a broken relationship, staying in Napa to clear his head. I didn't know he was engaged, she said, visibly angry. When I found out, I cut him off immediately. I didn't want anything to do with him. She also admitted that Leah had once shown up at the winery alone, about a week before she disappeared. Anne said Leah looked pale, nervous, and had asked to speak privately. She asked me a strange question, Anne recalled. Has Brad ever told you things that didn't feel right? I remember thinking she looked scared, but she never said much after that, just thanked me and left. A police sketch artist later helped Anne reconstruct the encounter. The fear in Leah's face, the urgency. It wasn't a stretch to imagine she had been gathering the courage to confront Brad or maybe even preparing to leave him. Meanwhile, back at the station, a forensic tech flagged something in the metadata of Leah's unsent email. The timestamp indicated it had been created at 10:41 p.m. on September 17th, roughly 8 hours before Leah was last seen. But there was something else. The draft had been modified 23 minutes later and then again at 11:22 p.m. Oddly, the email didn't reflect any visible changes. It appeared identical in each version. That's when they checked the laptop's activity log. At exactly 11:22 p.m., a different IP address had logged into Leah's email, one linked to the Airbnb's guest Wi-Fi network. But the device wasn't hers. It was Brad's phone. There was no good explanation for it. Leah's email had been opened from Brad's device after she allegedly went to bed. He had lied about not touching her laptop. The only logical conclusion was chilling. Brad had seen the email, maybe even read it before she vanished. Detectives subpoenaed the full router logs from the Airbnb and confirmed the activity. Brad had been online at 11:22 p.m. and again at 12:03 a.m. Why would someone so concerned about his missing fiancée be deleting browser history in the middle of the night? That's when Renner decided it was time to re-interview him. Brad showed up at the station in khakis and a polo, looking more annoyed than worried. "Are we still doing this?" he asked. "It's been 4 years." Renner didn't flinch. "It's been 4 years too long, Brad, and now we're getting somewhere." As the door shut behind them, the tape recorder clicked on. The interrogation room smelled faintly of stale coffee and lemon disinfectant. Brad sat with his arms folded, his eyes locked on Detective Renner across the small metal table. A tape recorder glowed red between them. "I'm getting tired of this," Brad said, voice flat. "I already told you everything." Renner ignored the protest and opened the thin file marked Pablo Gutierrez. He laid out 3 photos, the rows of vines where Leah's body had been unearthed, a close-up of her running shoe half swallowed by roots, and the blurry security footage still of a man in glasses standing near the southern fence line. "Recognize this spot?" Renner asked. Brad didn't look. "No, you're sure?" "Because Pablo, the Vineyard worker who found Leah, says you were there 3 days after she went missing." Brad's jaw twitched. "I don't know any Pablo." Renner studied him carefully. "He remembers you." "Glasses, dark shirt. Fancy watch?" "Said you claimed to be checking the irrigation." "That's ridiculous," Brad scoffed. "I never set foot back on that vineyard after Leah disappeared." Renner leaned forward. "Funny, because the property owner also remembers you. Showing up unannounced. Said you looked agitated. Kept asking if anyone had seen Leah that morning." "That was the day after she went missing," Brad snapped. "I was worried. I drove around." "I don't remember every conversation." Renner didn't blink. "You told the sheriff you stayed at the Airbnb all day. That you only left to meet deputies? Why lie?" Brad's mouth opened and closed. For the first time, uncertainty cracked his composure. I didn't think it mattered," he said finally. "You people act like I'm a monster?" "I was trying to find her," Renner steepled his fingers. "Or you were making sure no one would." Later that afternoon, Mariella Crane met Pablo at the vineyard. The autumn sun glared off the metal irrigation pipes as he led her to the place he'd seen Brad standing. "This is where he was," Pablo said, voice low. "By the fence. He had a clipboard. Sighed he needed to check the water schedule." "You're positive it was him?" Pablo's eyes were sad but certain. "See. I remember the watch, the glasses, and his face. He didn't belong here." Mariella turned, scanning the neat rows of trellises. From this vantage point, you could see almost to the main trail where Leah's footprints ended. "If you were standing here at dawn, you'd have a clear view of anyone who left the path." "Did he come alone?" she asked. "Yes." "And how long was he here?" Pablo thought carefully. "Maybe 20 minutes. He looked around. Then he walked back to the road." Mariella scribbled a note in her pad. "Did he say anything else?" Pablo hesitated. When he left, he turned and told. He swallowed. "If anyone asks, you didn't see me. Back at the station, Renner and Mariella compared timelines. Leah's smartwatch flatlined at 6:30 a.m. September 18th. Brad's phone pinged at the Airbnb at 8:12 a.m., but between those hours, there was a window enough time to confront Leah, and enough time to bury her before anyone came looking. Tapped the printed cell records. And he had no alibi. Mariella nodded. If Pablo's telling the truth, and I believe he is, Brad lied about his movements. Lied about never going back. They both fell silent. Maybe he went back to see if she'd been found, Renner said, or to make sure she never would be. Mariella replied. 3 days later, they brought Pablo into the station to give a formal statement. He sat nervously under the flickering fluorescent lights, fidgeting with the brim of his hat. Mariella leaned forward gently. You did the right thing coming to us. I know this isn't easy, Pablo swallowed. I didn't want trouble. You're not in trouble, she reassured him. But we need every detail. He recounted everything again, Brad's sudden appearance, the clipboard, the odd calmness in his voice. But the thing that struck him most wasn't what Brad did. It was what he didn't do. He never asked about the irrigation, Pablo said quietly. He didn't look at the pipes, just the vines. In his second interview, Brad refused to budge. His lawyer sat beside him, hand on his shoulder. But there was a flicker of fear in his eyes now. Mariella slid a photo across the table. Pablo's signed affidavit, with a timestamp, explain. This, she said calmly. Brad glanced at the paper but didn't touch it. He's lying. I never saw him. I never went back there. Mariella tilted her head. It's funny, Brad. You call everyone else liars, but every time we check your story, it falls apart. His jaw flexed. I'm not answering any more questions. She let the silence expand between them. You don't have to, she said finally. The vines already did. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the grape rows like a hush. The place where Leah lay buried was roped off now, marked with numbered stakes and small flags. It wasn't just a vineyard anymore. It was a crime scene. The room was cool and dim, lined with silent rows of wine barrels, each marked with a date and varietal. Anne stood just outside the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if she were holding something in. The detectives watched her carefully, the weight of years pressing between each word she finally released. I've tried to forget it, she whispered, but I can't anymore. The day Leah Mercer vanished, Anne said she hadn't heard from Brad. But the night after, she received a call, a number she recognized. Brad asked her to meet him urgently at the winery after closing hours. He said he needed someone to talk to. He sounded strange, cold, not like himself, she recalled, fingers tightening against her arms. When I got there, he was already inside the barrel room. Lights off, just standing there, alone, she hesitated. Her eyes moved to the small recorder on the table. Then back to the detectives. He said Leah left him that morning. That she took off after a fight and didn't say where she was going. And you believed him? Detective Rowland asked. Anne nodded faintly. At the time, yes, but something didn't feel right. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and there was a strong chemical smell, like bleach. It was on his hands. I remember, because when he hugged me, I gagged. The memory caught in her throat. I asked why he smelled like that. He laughed. Said he had spilled something while cleaning. Cleaning what? Rowland asked. He didn't say. That night, she stayed with him in the barrel room. It wasn't the first time they'd crossed a line, but it was the only time it felt wrong. Brad was distracted, distant. He barely spoke after the initial story. He kept glancing toward the winery's back door. There was this moment, Anne said, swallowing. We were lying there, and he whispered, You ever do something you can't take back? Detective Rowland exchanged a glance with his partner. Did he elaborate? No, I just dashed it off. I thought he meant the affair, but now... Anne opened her purse and handed over something, a small key, tarnished and wrapped in a torn piece of paper. I found this in his jacket. A few days later, after he stopped answering my calls, the detectives took it gently. The paper was yellowed and had a single number scribbled on it, 137, a locker number? Rowland guessed aloud, and they shrugged. I don't know, but I think he kept something there, something important. Back at the station, techs were already tracing the number. The investigation into Brad's possible involvement had widened in the last 48 hours. Surveillance footage was being pulled from surrounding areas. Cadaver dogs had returned to the vineyard to comb deeper, and the area behind the winery's processing shed was now considered a secondary crime scene. Brad, meanwhile, remained elusive. He had refused to return to California and claimed through his lawyer that he had no new information and had moved on with his life. But as more cracks in his timeline appeared, the pressure mounted. The winery manager, questioned later that day, confirmed that someone had overridden the lock. Code to the back entrance of the barrel room on the night Anae described. No record of a scheduled cleaning or maintenance. No reason anyone should have been there. And then came the locker. It was located at a private storage facility 2 towns over-registered under a name investigators traced back to a temporary identity Brad had used in Oregon years earlier. Inside Locker 137, they found 2 items, a faded gym bag containing women's running shoes, one visibly stained and missing its laces, a printed email draft unsigned, unsent but saved. Detective Rowland unfolded the page and read, "If something happens to me, please tell my mom to look in the red notebook under my car seat. I know Brad won't stop until he wins. But if this is how I go, I need the world to know I didn't run away. I wasn't weak. I just finally told the truth." It was Leah's voice. Unmistakably. The email timestamp placed it 2 nights before her disappearance. By now, the case was no longer a quiet missing persons investigation. It was a murder probe. The sheriff's office issued an immediate request to bring Brad in for questioning again, this time with intent to arrest. If the evidence held, but Brad was already gone. His apartment in Washington was cleared out. Neighbors said he left 2 days ago. No forwarding address. Just like that, he vanished. Detectives now had a new problem, finding a man who'd spent years perfecting the art of hiding in plain sight. And in the fog of his secrets, Leah's voice was finally beginning to rise. The air was heavy with silence as Detective Reese stood over the forensics table, examining the fractured skull fragment once more. Blunt force trauma, the examiner confirmed quietly, likely caused by a rounded object. Could have been a rock, could have been something else. The photo evidence of Leah's crushed cranium, once part of a vibrant and hopeful woman, was almost too much to bear. But it was the locket that haunted Reese most, recovered from beneath the gnarled roots of a syrah vine, its chain nearly fused. With rust, the silver oval had once clung to Leah's neck in life. Now it held a piece of her story in death. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded and water-damaged, but still discernible, a young boy in a soccer uniform, grinning up at the camera with the same almond-shaped eyes Leah had, her brother Jacob. Mercer, he died in a car crash nearly a decade earlier, and by all accounts, Leah had never fully recovered. Monica had once told investigators that the locket was the one thing Leah wore every day. Even to bed, she called it her tether. Monica had whispered. She believed as long as she had Jacob close, she couldn't fully lose herself. Detective Reese looked out over the vineyard now, rows of vines basking in late summer haze. The place had transformed since Leah's disappearance. New owners, new wines, repainted signage, but the land remembered. It had held on to her quietly beneath the soil and silence, until it couldn't anymore. "Run me through the morning again," he told his partner Delgado as they walked the perimeter. Where Leah's remains had been found, Delgado nodded. Based on the coroner's estimate, she died sometime between 6:30 and 9 a.m. That gives us a narrow window. Brad claimed he was still asleep when she left. But if Leah did return here that morning, then she either came willingly, Reese muttered, or someone lured her. They paused by the old irrigation shack in use now, padlocked but still standing. It was only 100 yards from the spot where her body was buried. A few yards beyond, the winery's barrel room stood in shadow, its thick stone walls giving it an eerie permanence. Delgado tapped his notebook. "Don't forget what Anae said Brad told her Leah had already left him. That was the same day Leah supposedly went for a jog. And his hand smelled like bleach. Reese added grimly. That wasn't grief. That was scrubbing away guilt. The forensic team had found trace amounts of cleaning agents in the soil where the locket was found. Enough to raise suspicion, but not enough to determine the original purpose. A bottle of bleach, a soaked rag, a rinsed shovel. There were too many possibilities. Still, it painted a picture Leah didn't vanish into the wild as Brad had insisted. She was disposed of carefully, deliberately. And emotionally, because that locket wasn't lost by accident, she wouldn't have taken it off willingly, Monica had said. If it was found with her, it means she knew, or someone knew, what it meant to her. Reese believed the same. Someone buried her with it either as a twisted token of affection or a desperate gesture of remorse, but why come back to the vineyard? The answer came 2 days later, buried not in the soil but in Leah's digital archives. Her old cloud drive, once locked and encrypted, was finally cracked open by the tech team. There, amidst old photos and saved recipes, was a voice memo untitled and time-stamped at 4:43 a.m. On the day she disappeared, her voice trembled as it played through the speakers. In the evidence room, if something happens to me, please don't let him tell my story. I think he's watching me more. He won't talk about what happened last week. I thought we were past it, but now I don't know. I might go back to the vineyard this morning. I need to know if he lied. Reese. Froze. So she did go back, voluntarily, confrontational, hopeful, maybe, but not stupid. She knew something had changed. What happened last week, she'd said. The week Brad had slept at Inase's place, it all converged now. Leah's spiral, her bruised ribs, her unsent email. And now, her voice from the grave, she confronted him, Reese whispered. She found out about Inase or the vineyard. Or both, and he snapped. Delgado turned the locket over in his gloved hand, careful not to smudge its surface. He buried her here, in the same field he said he hadn't visited in years. Except Pablo saw him here 3 days after she vanished, Reese replied. Checking the irrigation. Then why leave the locket? Delgado asked. Reese shook his head. That's the part I can't figure out. Was it remorse or arrogance? Silence settled between them, broken only by the distant buzz of harvesters. In the next valley, then Reese's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his eyes narrowed. That was the lab, he said. They found something else. Traces of synthetic fiber on the locket chain? Clothing? Possibly. Reese looked back at the dig site. Or gloves, Delgado frowned. You think someone helped him? Reese didn't answer. But in his gut, a storm was rising. If Brad didn't act alone, then someone else knew everything. And they had stayed silent for 4 years. They walked back to the SUV, dust clinging to their boots, and behind them, deep in the vineyard shadows, a figure watched silently, gripping something small and silver in their coat pocket, something that once belonged to Leah. The scent of rain lingered in the air as Detective Morales stood behind the one-way mirror, arms folded, watching Brad slouch in the metal chair. The interrogation room was cold, dim, stripped of all comfort. Brad's maroon shirt was soaked with sweat. His once defiant posture had crumbled into something less rehearsed, twitchy, withdrawn, cornered. 2 days earlier, forensics had confirmed. The skull fracture on Leah Mercer matched the curvature of a heavy wine mallet commonly used at the vineyard. Coupled with the bleach traces found in the barrel room and Inase's damning testimony, a warrant for Brad's arrest had been swift. Now, Morales entered the room slowly, a manila folder in one hand, recorder in the other. He sat opposite Brad and clicked the device on. Let's start again, he said, voice even. From the morning Leah disappeared. Brad rubbed his palms together. His gaze darted to the folder, then back at Morales. She was upset, he mumbled. That's all I remember. Morales opened the folder, revealing photos: Leah's locket, the soil-stained sneaker, the wine mallet. You remember more than that. She didn't just vanish. You told Inase she left you. You had bleach on your hands. Why lie? Brad swallowed hard. I didn't lie. Not, he hesitated, then leaned forward, his eyes glassy. We fought, okay? She said she was going to the cops. Said she found Anace's texts. She was waving her phone around. What did you do? Brad's lips trembled. I told her to calm down, but she was spiraling. Screaming, crying, said I was a fraud. Said I wasn't the man she agreed to marry. And then? Brad's voice lowered to a hoarse whisper. She turned to walk away. I reached for her, arm to stop her, and she slipped. Morales tilted his head. She slipped? There was water on the concrete near the vines, Brad said quickly. She fell backward, hit her head. It was an accident. Then why didn't you call for help? Brad froze. You dragged her body, buried her in the vineyard. Cleaned the barrel room. You drove back pretending everything was fine, Morales's voice rose. That's not the action of a man shocked by an accident. Brad pressed his hands to his eyes. I panicked, he sobbed. I thought if they knew about my record in Oregon, if they knew I lied to her. I was done? Everything I'd built, everything I tried to become, it would all be gone? So you buried her like trash? Morales snapped. You crushed her locket under vines and went wine tasting with Anae the next night? I didn't mean to kill her, Brad whimpered. I swear to God. Silence settled like dust. Outside the room, District Attorney Louise Garza observed, her face unreadable. She turned to Detective Vega. He's not getting voluntary manslaughter for this. Not after what we've seen. Vega nodded. We'll charge for second degree, maybe even first. Garza raised an eyebrow. You think it was premeditated? He brought her back to the vineyard. She didn't go there alone, Vega replied. He told Anae she was gone that morning. That means he already knew she wouldn't return. That bleach, that wasn't panic, that was planning. Back inside, Brad slumped over the table, face in his hands. Morales slid the folder toward him. You want redemption? Help her mother bury her daughter. Tell the whole truth. I told you everything, Brad muttered. Morales shook his head. No, you didn't. We found Leah's draft email. Titled, If Something Happens to Me, She Was Scared of You. She had reason to be. Brad looked up, face pale. You don't understand. She changed. She didn't change. She finally saw who you were. Brad stared blankly at the photos splayed across the table. His lips moved soundlessly for a moment before a phrase escaped in a whisper. I never meant to. Morales didn't reply. He stood and left the room, shutting the door behind him. The recorder kept rolling. Later that evening, news broke of the arrest. Cameras flashed outside the sheriff's department. Reporters called Brad a monster, a coward, a manipulator. A grainy image of Leah smiling in her running gear flashed across every screen, accompanied by the words, Justice for Leah Mercer. But back at her mother's house, a smaller moment unfolded. A forensic officer handed Margaret Mercer a small sealed bag. Inside it, the tarnished locket with her late son's photo, unearthed from under 4 years of dirt and silence. Margaret pressed the plastic to her chest and closed her eyes. She wore that every day, she whispered, even after Kyle died. I used to tell her that kind of grief can make you fierce, or it can make you soft. She was both, the officer said quietly. Margaret nodded. She was fire-wrapped in kindness. As the house fell into a hushed evening, Margaret walked to her backyard garden. She opened the locket and stared at her children's faces, one lost to tragedy, the other to violence. She whispered to the wind, I won't let them forget her. But not all was quiet that same night. A local journalist named Camille Torres was reviewing old footage from a winery showcase, video shot weeks before Leah's death. In a blink-and-you-miss-it frame, someone walks past the camera in the background, Brad. And someone else, Camille paused the footage. Her eyes narrowed, It wasn't Anai's, It was a woman with long red hair wearing a Vineyard apron, Camille. Zoomed in, a new thread had just unraveled. The sun rose gently over the Napa hills the morning the vineyard reopened. Dew clung to the vines like 1,000 quiet teardrops. The same soil that once hid Leah Mercer's remains now bore rows of ripening fruit, nature carrying on. Indifferent, yet marked forever, a memorial stone had been placed under the old sycamore tree, just a few feet from where Pablo found the shoe tangled in roots. The engraved plaque read simply, Leah Mercer, 1989 to 2019. She grew in courage where fear had once bloomed. Pablo stood before it every morning now, clutching a bundle of wildflowers. It had become his ritual. He said little, but workers noticed he trimmed that row more carefully than any other. One vine near the grave marker had started to twist upward, climbing unusually high as, if trying to reach something beyond the sky. The public reaction to the case was swift and deeply divided. The media painted Leah as a cautionary tale of love turned lethal, but those closest to her, especially Monica, fought hard to reclaim her story. She wasn't a victim, Monica said during an emotional interview. She was surviving until the very end. She was writing, she was planning to leave, she was ready. Leah's journals, found in a locked drawer at home, were made public by her family. Pages of delicate handwriting painted a vivid picture of emotional erosion. In them, Leah documented everything: Brad's erratic moods, the apologies that followed, the confusion, the hope, and finally the clarity. One entry read, "He dims the lights when I shine. He says it's love, but it feels like fear wearing perfume." Another, dated just days before her disappearance, said, "I don't know who he is anymore. I think he wants me small. And I'm not small." But the most haunting entry of all was the last one. "Tomorrow I'll speak up, even if it cracks everything open." That journal page was printed and placed inside a weatherproof frame at the memorial site. Visitors read it in silence, some with tears, others with clenched jaws. Survivors of domestic abuse left ribbons and notes tied to the nearby vines, transforming the once hidden grave into a quiet shrine of collective pain and resilience. The winery owners, under pressure and grappling with guilt, renamed the vineyard's southern slope, where Leah was found, Leah's Rise. A small percentage of every bottle sold from that block would now go to support women's shelters across California. It wasn't justice, but it was a beginning. Meanwhile, Brad awaited trial in a county detention center. His confession was partial, murky, wrapped in self-pity. "I never meant to kill her," he'd muttered. But no jury would be swayed by his crocodile tears, especially after the forensics. The lies and Inace's testimony. Inace had since left the country, quietly resigning and returning to her family in Marseille. In her final statement to detectives, she admitted Brad grew distant and volatile in the days after Leah vanished. He couldn't sleep. He drank. He stared at the vines like they were whispering secrets. Back at the vineyard, silence returned, not the silence of fear, but of reflection. Workers still trimmed, harvested, and pressed. But now they lowered their voices near the southern block, as if the earth had earned a kind of reverence. Monica often came by after work. She'd sit on the bench facing the memorial and read from Leah's favorite novel. She never stayed long. Just enough to let her grief stretch its legs before walking it back home. What the vines remembered could never be fully known. But what people remembered, that mattered. Leah's story had spread far beyond the rows of grapes and sunlit hills. It reached classrooms, courtrooms, and shelters. It changed laws. It encouraged other women to speak up, to document, to leave. When silence became too costly, the tragedy of her death was undeniable. But in the cracks, something had grown: truth, voice, echoes of a woman who once refused to disappear quietly. And still, the vines grew. As summer leaned into harvest, Pablo stood once more before the stone, flowers in hand. A cool breeze passed through the leaves. For a moment, it almost sounded like a whisper, then came a rustle at the edge of the vineyard. A journalist, camera slung at her side, held a small envelope in her hand. "I think this belongs to Leah," she said softly. "It was sent to our office, no return address, but inside there's a photograph, one we've never seen before." She handed it over carefully. The picture was faded but unmistakable. Leah, standing alone, crying, at the vineyard gates. Time, STAMP, 9:03 a.m., the morning she vanished. June stood on the edge of the vineyard's overlook, wind tugging gently at her scarf. In her hands, she held a small, round mirror, its frame simple, worn, and silver, like something from another era. It had belonged to Leah, tucked away in the same memory box where the journal pages had been found. Vanessa said Leah used to carry it everywhere when she was younger, checking her reflection not for vanity, but to remind herself who she was. She used to say, Vanessa had told June quietly, if I forget who I am, I'll look myself in the eyes. Now the mirror would serve another purpose. June hiked alone through the lower Vineyard path, taking the same trail that Leah had once taken when she disappeared. Not for curiosity, not for fear, but for closure. She moved slowly, almost ceremonially. Past the wild rosebush where Leah's broken locket had been found. Past the uneven stone wall that had concealed a bloodstain no rainfall could wash away. She reached the final benda, place that overlooked the southern valley. It was where, years ago, someone thought they saw a glint of light, a flicker, a call. The place where Leah had possibly tried, in her final hour, to signal for help. No one knew for certain. But June had read the last page of the journal. The one the press hadn't published, the one only Vanessa had seen. If I don't make it out, maybe someday someone will stand where I stood, see what I saw, and know I was here. I'll leave light behind. June climbed the last few feet up the slope. The late afternoon sun poured across the valley like liquid gold. Birds soared low over the hills. Everything smelled like earth, and memory dot she found a low, sturdy branch on a slender olive tree that had grown wild since Leah's death. June reached up and tied the mirror to the branch with a piece of twine. It spun gently in the wind, catching the sunlight, and then the wind shifted, the mirror turned. For a moment, the light hit it just right, casting a sudden, brilliant flash. Across the valley, far above, a drone, a small quadcopter owned by a Vineyard worker surveying crop health, caught the flash on its camera. It flickered like a Morse code signal from the past. The pilot blinked and rewound the footage. What the? He muttered, back at the Vineyard's guest center. The pilot brought the drone footage to Pablo. You ever seen something like this out there? He asked, pointing to the screen. Pablo squinted at the footage. The flash had come from the wild southern ridge, exactly where Leah had tried to call for help. His throat tightened. The next day, Pablo hiked the trail himself. He found the mirror, turning gently, throwing glimmers of light like a lighthouse. He stood there for a long while, hat in his hands. Gracias, he whispered, later that evening. June shared a photo of the mirror tied to the tree. It went viral overnight. People across the country reposted it with captions like, "The light she left behind," and "Some souls never dim." And beneath it all, Leah's voice was heard. Again, not through words, but through reflection. Through the courage she'd fought to hold on to, and the legacy she'd unwillingly left behind. Months passed. Tourists still visited. The wine still flowed, but more people now stopped at the stone. They spoke her name. They asked questions. They remembered. And in that remembering, something quiet but powerful grew in time. A young woman who had read Leah's journal started a vineyard of her own. She called it Luce Vita, Italian for light life. She credited Leah for inspiring her to walk away from a man who had once controlled her voice. Because when someone dares to leave a signal behind, even in the dark, even when no one sees it at first, it can still change someone's course. Somewhere, Leah's light still turned, steady and brave. Not lost, just finally seen.